Mara Jensen never believed the rumors about the night shift at Crestwood Pharmacy, and neither did Ethan Cole. But on their first week working together, they both noticed the same thing: the shelves seemed to move when no one was looking, and the security cameras never showed what was really happening in the aisles. By the end of that week, only one of them would make it out alive, and even they wouldn't be the same. The night shift always felt longer than it should. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly beneath the hum of fluorescent lights, each one flickering just enough to make me uneasy. The pharmacy looked harmless during the day, shelves neatly stacked with colorful boxes and bottles that promised healing. But at night, the same aisles seemed distorted, shadows stretching longer than they should, reflections in the glass twisting into odd shapes. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. Most nights I would distract myself by organizing shelves or double-checking inventory. But on this particular night, there was a heaviness in the air I couldn't ignore. The silence was suffocating. I could hear every small sound I made: the rustle of pill bottles, the scrape of cardboard against the metal shelves, the squeak of my shoes against the polished floor. It felt as though the walls themselves were listening. I kept glancing at the large glass windows at the front of the pharmacy. They didn't reflect me clearly. Instead, they warped my figure, stretching my body and darkening my eyes, like a stranger mimicking my every move. When I blinked, the reflection didn't. I shook my head quickly, blaming exhaustion. I had been working too many late nights, and lack of sleep could play tricks on the mind. I focused on my task, stocking the last few shelves with boxes of antibiotics and cold medicine. That was when I saw it. A single white box sat at the far end of the shelf. It hadn't been there before. The label was blank, no print, no barcode, no branding of any kind. It looked sterile, almost too perfect, as though it didn't belong. Curious, I picked it up. The cardboard was unnaturally cold, a chill biting into my skin the longer I held it. The weight didn't feel right either. It was heavier than an empty box but lighter than one filled with pills. My first thought was that it was a manufacturer's error, a misprint tossed into the shipment by mistake. I set it down on the counter, intending to mark it for return in the morning, but when I turned back to finish stocking the shelf I froze. The box was back, sat exactly where it had been, lined perfectly with the others, as if I had never touched it. My pulse quickened, and I glanced at the counter behind me. Empty. The box wasn't there anymore. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that my mind had simply slipped. But deep down, I knew I hadn't made a mistake. The building suddenly groaned, the faint creak of settling wood. But underneath it was another sound: soft, deliberate clicking, like nails tapping against glass. It came from the back storage room. My stomach dropped. That room was locked. I had locked it myself when I started my shift, and I hadn't gone back there all night. No one else had a key at this hour. The clicking grew louder, sharper, like someone scratching at the walls from inside. I took a step closer, my legs trembling, though every part of me screamed not to. The air around the door felt colder, heavy with a metallic tense that burned at the back of my throat. I stood there for what felt like forever, waiting, listening, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. Instead, something shifted behind the door, a slow, dragging sound, as if someone had moved across the floor and pressed their weight against the other side. My chest tightened, and my breathing grew shallow. I wanted to run, to get as far away as possible, but my feet wouldn't move. I felt rooted to the spot, trapped by the dread pooling in my stomach. For a moment, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. I leaned in, straining to hear, when something tapped directly against the door, 3 sharp knocks that rattled the frame. My heart lurched into my throat. The keys in my pocket jingled faintly as my hand shook against them. Whoever, or whatever, was in there was aware of me. I stumbled backward, knocking over a basket of supplies. Bottles rolled across the floor, clinking and rattling as they scattered. The noise echoed through the empty pharmacy, and in the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the reflection of the front glass. A figure, tall and thin, stood between the aisles, its head cocked to one side. I whipped my head around, but the space was empty. When I looked back at the glass, the reflection was still there, only this time it was closer. And behind me, the locked door handle began to turn. I couldn't breathe as I watched the handle of the locked storage door twitch, then stop. My whole body went cold. I told myself it had to be my imagination, a trick of my tired mind, but I couldn't shake the image of the handle moving on its own. The silence returned, but it was thicker now, heavier, as if the pharmacy itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. I forced myself to move, turning away from the door and trying to focus on something normal. My footsteps echoed across the polished floor, each one unnervingly loud. The aisles looked longer than before, stretched in ways that didn't feel possible. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear my vision, but the distortion didn't go away. I could see the shelves bending slightly, tilting as though they weren't anchored properly. The buzzing of the overhead lights grew harsher, drilling into my skull until it was all I could hear. Out of desperation, I glanced up at the security cameras. Their small red lights blinked steadily, reassuring in a way. At least I wasn't completely cut off from reality. But when I turned to check the monitors behind the counter, a chill shot straight through me. Every screen was static. No aisles, no shelves, no sign of me. Just endless, shifting white noise. I tried switching channels, adjusting controls, but nothing changed. It felt like the building itself had gone blind. Or maybe it didn't want me to see what was happening anymore. The sudden flicker of light behind me drew my attention to the refrigerator where the medications were stored. It flickered once, twice, then went out completely, leaving the glass door cloaked in darkness. The faint humming stopped too, as if the power to that one section had died. The smell in the air changed almost immediately. The clean, sterile scent of rubbing alcohol and packaged medicine turned sharp, sour, metallic. I covered my nose, my eyes watering as I stepped closer. My hand shook as I pulled the door open. What I saw inside made my stomach twist. Every shelf was empty. Rows upon rows that should have been filled with vials and bags of medication were bare, wiped clean as though they had never been stocked. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. It wasn't possible. I had seen the delivery come in earlier that day. I had checked it myself. Then my eyes caught at the white box. It sat perfectly centered on the middle shelf, waiting, as though someone had placed it there deliberately. My chest tightened as I stared at it, unwilling to move closer but unable to look away. Against my will, I leaned toward the glass, and that was when I noticed my reflection. It didn't match me. My hand hovered in the air, frozen in place, but the reflection's hand continued reaching forward, its fingers twitching as if straining to break free. My heart thundered in my chest. I leaned back quickly, but the reflection leaned closer, its face stretched, its eyes far too dark. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The refrigerator light blinked back on in an instant, blindingly bright, and the reflection snapped into sync with me again, as though nothing had happened. I staggered backward, gasping, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The shelves inside the fridge were no longer empty. Every vial, every bag of medication was back in its place, neat and untouched. My mind screamed at me to leave, to get out of this place, but my legs wouldn't carry me to the door. I glanced around desperately, searching for the white box, certain it was gone. My chest sank when I realized I was right. It wasn't inside the refrigerator anymore. Slowly, as though my body was moving without me, I turned my head toward the counter. There it was, sitting neatly on the edge, only a few steps away from me, as though it had followed. The room spun, my vision tunneling, and a heavy dread washed over me. It wasn't just appearing randomly, it was moving closer. Each time I tried to get away, it found me again. I could feel it now, a pressure in the air, almost like the room itself was leaning toward me, waiting for me to pick it up again. The clicking sound from the storage room started once more, sharper and faster than before. This time it wasn't nails on glass, it was like dozens of bottles being tapped together, an endless rattling that made my skin crawl. The handle on the door twitched again, harder this time, jerking as if something inside was struggling to get out. I stared at the counter, my eyes locked on the white box. My chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. I could swear the edges of the box pulsed faintly, like it was alive, breathing in the same rhythm as me. The sound of rattling bottles grew deafening, echoing across every aisle, and then it all stopped at once, cutting off in an instant, leaving only silence. But the box had moved again. Now it sat open, lid tilted back, though I hadn't touched it. Inside was only darkness, too deep, too endless for such a small container. And for a split second I thought I saw something move in the shadows inside. Something that was watching me just as closely as I was watching it. I couldn't stand being near that open box. The darkness inside it seemed deeper than the room itself, as if it didn't belong to this world. I backed away, trying to convince myself it was only packaging, an empty container, nothing more. But every step I took made me feel like I was being pulled back toward it. The air around me felt thick, dragging me down, forcing me to move slower. My chest ached as I struggled to breathe. I turned down an aisle, determined to put as much distance between myself and the counter as possible. But the aisles felt wrong. They stretched on far longer than they should have, rows of medicine bottles and bandages repeating endlessly. I had walked this pharmacy 100 times during the day, and I knew it wasn't this big. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, bouncing back at me seconds later, as though the shelves themselves were whispering them back. I kept walking, heart hammering, when the sound began, a faint pop, then another. Like someone was pressing pills through a blister pack. The sound repeated again and again, slow at first, then faster, overlapping until it filled the air. It came from everywhere at once, surrounding me, my skin prickled with goosebumps. I knew there was no one else here, but the sound was impossible to ignore. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it didn't help. The pops grew louder, harsher, until they cracked like breaking bones. Panic gripped me, and I started running, desperate to find the front door. I turned corner after corner, but each aisle only led to another. My breath came in ragged gasps, and sweat trickled down my face. The air grew colder with every step, my vision swimming as if the lights above me were dimming. At the end of one aisle, I caught sight of a figure. It was tall, too tall, standing perfectly still at the far end. My body froze, even as my mind screamed to run. Its head tilted slowly, unnaturally, almost as if it was studying me. I blinked, and it was gone. The aisle was empty again, but the dread didn't leave. I knew I was being watched. I stumbled into the consultation room, slamming the door shut behind me. My body trembled as I pressed my back against the wall. The smell of disinfectant hit me instantly, sharp and overpowering, burning my nose and throat. I coughed, eyes watering, before noticing the desk in front of me. A single piece of paper lay there, perfectly placed in the center. It was a prescription slip. My name was written across the top in shaky, uneven letters. The handwriting didn't look familiar, but it was definitely mine. My chest tightened as I read the medication listed below. The word was twisted, written in jagged letters that didn't make sense. My eyes struggled to focus, the letters shifting and bending as if they were alive. I blinked hard, but the word refused to stay still. At the bottom of the slip, scrawled in red ink, was a message: "Do not let it out." My stomach dropped. I didn't understand what it meant, but I didn't need to. The words filled me with a sense of dread deeper than anything I had felt before. The paper shook in my trembling hands as I looked around the room, praying that I was alone. That's when I heard it. The faintest sound of a hinge creaking. My eyes darted to the door. Slowly, almost painfully, the handle began to turn. I froze, clutching the slip tighter. My breath caught in my throat. The door opened a crack, and the light from the pharmacy spilled into the room. Nothing stood there, yet I could feel something had come in. The temperature plummeted. The lights flickered once, then steadied, casting long shadows across the floor. I tried to move, but my legs felt like stone. The prescription slip slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the ground. As it landed, the words on the page twisted again, shifting into something new, something I couldn't read. The silence was unbearable. I forced myself to turn, inch by inch, toward the open doorway. The hallway outside was empty, but the shadows stretched unnaturally, bending toward the room as if reaching inside. And then, in the corner of my eye, I saw it. Something shifted against the far wall. A shape, tall and stretched thin, crouched low as though waiting for me to notice. My breath caught, my vision swam, and my body went rigid. It didn't move closer. It just stayed there, its head cocked at an impossible angle, watching me in silence. I blinked hard, and the corner was empty again, but the prescription slip on the floor was gone. In its place sat the white box, closed now, as if it had never been opened at all. The sight of that box sitting in the consultation room froze me where I stood. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs as I stared at it, perfectly sealed, as though it hadn't been opened at all. I knew I had torn the lid before, had seen what was inside, but now it looked untouched, clean, almost inviting. My mouth went dry, and I felt the weight of the air pressing down on me, forcing me to take a step closer. My legs moved as if they didn't belong to me. Each step toward the box sent a ripple of dread crawling through my skin. The smell in the room changed again. The strong disinfectant faded, replaced by something bitter and metallic, like rust or dried blood. I reached the desk and hesitated, my hand hovering just above the box. My fingertips trembled in the air, drawn to it, even though every instinct screamed at me not to touch it. I lifted the lid. Inside, rows of small glass vials glistened under the harsh light. Each vial was filled with a black liquid that shifted and shimmered like oil on water. The closer I looked, the more wrong it seemed. The liquid wasn't still, it pulsed faintly, as if it were alive. The smell grew stronger, making my stomach twist. I reached for one vial with shaking hands, the glass cool against my skin. That was when I saw it. Pressed against the inside of the vial was a face. Small, distorted, human-like, its mouth open in a soundless scream. My breath hitched, and I nearly dropped it, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The face's eyes opened suddenly, staring at me through the glass. They were too sharp, too aware. I gasped and dropped the vial to the floor. The sound of glass shattering never came. Instead, the vial rolled across the tiles, perfectly intact, before stopping neatly in line with the others. I staggered back, watching in horror as every single vial began to tremble, rattling in unison, vibrating with a low hum that filled the room. The sound grew louder, sharper, until I thought my ears would burst. Then, all at once, they stopped. The silence was suffocating. My pulse pounded in my head, each throb echoing in my ears. Then, faintly, whispers crept into the air. Soft at first, impossible to understand, but growing steadily clearer. They slithered through the room, brushing against my skin like cold fingers. My name, over and over. Dozens of voices whispering it, coaxing me, calling me closer to the desk. The lights above me flickered once, twice, then snapped off completely. Darkness swallowed the room, absolute and heavy. My chest tightened, and my hands fumbled blindly for the door, but I froze when I realized the whispers hadn't stopped. They were louder now, all around me, right at my ears, though nothing touched me. I could feel hot, damp breath against my skin, though the room was empty. In the pitch black I crouched low, pressing myself into the corner like a trapped animal. The sound of glass shifting on the desk echoed through the dark. The vials were moving on their own, rolling across the surface, dropping to the floor one by one. I clamped my hands over my ears, but I could still hear them teeny thuds against the tiles, followed by the faint rattle as they settled into neat, deliberate lines. The emergency lights flicked on, bathing everything in a dull red glow. My stomach twisted when I saw what had happened. The vials covered the floor now, arranged in perfect patterns across the tiles, shapes, symbols, twisting, spiraling designs that seemed to shift when I blinked, pulling at my vision, dragging me toward them. My head pounded and I tore my eyes away, but the symbols were burned into my mind, moving behind my eyelids like they were carved into me. My breath came in shallow gasps. I stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape, but the whispers followed, growing into guttural chants, their tones harsh and unnatural. I slammed into the hallway, my legs barely carrying me forward. The air outside the consultation room was just as wrong. Every aisle looked warped, stretched, the shelves leaning like crooked teeth. At the far end of the pharmacy, I saw movement. A shadow peeled itself from the wall, tall and jagged, its limbs too long. It moved slowly, deliberately, though it didn't step forward. My eyes darted back to the consultation room and my blood ran cold. The vials hadn't stayed behind. They were sliding out through the doorway, clinking softly as they moved along the tiles, arranging themselves across the floor of the pharmacy like soldiers lining up. The whispers rose again, drowning out every other sound, until I realized they weren't calling my name anymore. They were laughing. Low, broken laughter that scraped against my skull like glass. And when I turned back down the aisle, the shadow was gone. But I wasn't alone. Something was standing just a few steps behind me, its reflection stretching across the polished floor. The reflection stretched across the tiles before I even dared to turn. My entire body locked up, every nerve on edge, as I stared at the dark shape rippling on the floor. It was longer than it should have been, its arms reaching far past its sides, fingers stretched into unnatural points. My throat tightened, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Slowly, against every instinct screaming inside me, I turned to look. There was nothing there. The aisle behind me was empty. My chest heaved with a shaky breath, and I blinked, convincing myself it had been another trick of the light. But when I looked back at the ground, the reflection was still there, clearer than ever, only now it was smiling. My own face, but wrong. The mouth too wide, the teeth too sharp. I staggered backward, bumping into the shelves, bottles rattling around me. The entire building seemed to groan in response, the walls creaking as though they were alive. I bolted down the aisle, not caring where it led, only knowing I needed to get away. My legs felt heavy, each step echoing through the pharmacy, the sound swallowed by the endless whispers that crawled along the shelves. I aimed for the front doors. They were only a blur of glass at the end of the aisle, glowing faintly under the emergency lights. Relief surged through me. I could almost escape. But as I drew closer, my steps slowed. The doors weren't doors anymore. The glass had vanished, replaced by a seamless wall. No handle, no frame, just cold, unbroken surface where the exit should have been. I slammed my fists against it, panic rising like fire in my veins. The wall didn't move, didn't even echo my blows. It was as solid and lifeless as stone. My reflection stared back at me in the surface, distorted, twisting, as though it was pressed against the other side, desperate to get out. Its eyes were black voids, and its lips moved in a frantic whisper I couldn't hear. I stumbled back, clutching my head, and turned toward the aisles. That was when I realized I wasn't alone. The pharmacy wasn't empty anymore. Shapes stood at the ends of the rows, tall and stiff, their faces hidden in the shadows. One by one they emerged, stepping into the dull red light. Their bodies were crooked, their movements jerky, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. Each one clutched a vial of that same black liquid, holding it carefully in their shaking hands. I pressed myself against the wall, chest heaving as the figures surrounded me. None of them spoke. None of them made a sound. They only stood there, raising the vials slowly, deliberately, as if in some kind of ritual. The liquid inside swirled and churned, and I saw faces pressed against the glass again, hundreds of them this time, writhing in silent agony. One figure stepped closer, breaking from the circle. My eyes widened as I recognized its face, mine, my own body, standing there in front of me, pale and lifeless, but smiling with that same stretched grin. Its eyes were bottomless pits of black. It tilted its head, studying me like a predator with its prey. Then, without breaking its stare, it dropped the vial it was holding. The glass shattered against the floor, but the liquid inside didn't spill like normal. Instead, it crawled outward, spreading across the tiles like veins, inching toward my shoes. I tried to move, but my legs refused to obey. My reflection, my double, stepped closer, and as it did, the others followed, their vials trembling in their hands. The liquid reached me, seeping into the seams of my shoes. It was cold, so cold it burned, and I gasped, choking on the air. I looked down, and what I saw froze me completely. My reflection stared back at me in the black liquid, only it wasn't copying me anymore. Its lips curled into that awful grin, and then it blinked. I stumbled back, desperate to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The aisles twisted in impossible directions, closing in, warping until the shelves leaned over me like jaws. The whispers swelled into laughter, broken and jagged, echoing from every direction. My double stepped closer, reaching out its hand, its black eyes fixed on mine. The liquid spread faster now, covering the floor, swallowing the light. My body trembled violently as it rose around my ankles, my knees, pulling me down. My reflection leaned closer, its grin stretching wider, and for the first time, I felt the whispers inside my head. They weren't calling my name anymore. They were telling me to let go. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was the pharmacy itself and the reflection of the liquid. Only it wasn't the same place. The aisles were endless, the shelves rotting, the lights all dead. And standing in the center was me or something wearing my face, smiling as it watched from the other side.